This is the Nick Winter Show, and I do the entertaining, thank you. Let's go out with something really hot for these folks. A big hit out of 77. Star Wars, nothing but Star Wars. Give me the Star
Welcome back to the Fwooshcast. It is your Fwoosh on the radio. I'm your host, Tony, known on the boards as Hagope. I'm here again with Nick, known on the boards as VB. Hey, Nick.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning to you. We're coming to you live, taped live, from New York City and San Antonio, Texas. The Pace Picante people are so confused they don't know even what to do.
New York City?
Hey, we got ourselves covered on both ends. We have both the cosmopolitan splendor of New York, and we have someone who knows what picante sauce is supposed to taste like. So,
well, you still get an argument about that everywhere you go here. So,
I will concede there is that you'd be mighty challenged to find good Mexican food in New York City, which seems crazy. It seems
I don't know. The last place that you and I ate at when we were doing Toy Fair, that wasn't bad at all.
Yeah, no, that's my favorite little burrito joint, but it is tough. So maybe eventually, they say that the Mexican population is the fastest growing demographic here in New York. So maybe eventually we'll have enough that we'll get some good Mexican. But I'm originally from California, so.
Aha.
I know my way around some Mexican food, and you're actually from Kansas, yeah?
Well,
or previously
Missouri,
right?
Missouri. It's Kansas City, Missouri. That's a big thing.
I seem to recall that. Yeah, but the reason I bring that up is because I was fortunate enough to see the Yankees destroy the Royals yesterday at Yankee Stadium.
Oh, how lovely!
Yeah, but it was as a baseball fan more than any particular team, although of course I am a Yankees fan, but as a baseball fan it was a Pyrrhic victory because Kansas City's pitcher left the game after one pitch with a sore shoulder. That would be your boy Duffy, who's been carrying a lot of the load for you guys recently. So
even when it's good luck, it's hard luck. What can I say?
Yeah, so I do hope that he's going to be all right. We mentioned your Royals a couple of weeks ago briefly, and I think I may have either jinxed them or helped them, depending on your.
I'm assigning that blame directly on you, sir.
But I did say that even though this was their first good season in like 25 years, that they would probably still not make the postseason. But that looks to be wrong. Now at this point, we're like 2 weeks left in the season, and they are solidly in first place in their division, and it looks like they will easily make the postseason.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So. Anyway, more power to you. I got to say, I don't remember a year in baseball where there was more parity among all the different teams, really in every division that you look at, Chicago Cubs aside.
And one of my best friends is a hardcore Cubs fan. He's from Chicago, so he's used to feeling the pain. But at least the Royals are doing something for him this year.
Yeah. So we'll keep that in the back of our minds as the postseason comes upon us. But we're talking Star Wars today, my friend.
Yeah, we've been talking about Star Wars for a while now, so it just seems like it makes sense to be talking about Star Wars.
Of course, this being a Fwooshcast, we're mainly looking at toys. And when you look at Star Wars toys right now, it's all about Star Wars Black. And we've talked a little bit about Star Wars Black. But the last time we spoke, we talked a lot about the Chewbacca figure that you had just recently gotten, but now you're in possession of the Darth Vader figure.
I am.
And there's a little more ambivalence on this guy, right?
Well, I will tell you, if you didn't catch it before, we were able to do a couple of early reviews of Darth Vader, both a written review and Cannonball actually handled a video review not too long ago, and he and I were a little bit mixed when it came to how we felt about the figure overall, but I was a little harder on it, I think, at the very beginning. I do have to say, though, that some of the things that I was probably more miffed about at the beginning, I've come down a little bit, but I really thought that Darth Vader was a good kickoff figure to get a conversation started about kind of my current feelings about Star Wars Black overall, in that it's just so close. They have had some fantastic out-of-the-park figures. They've had some that, due to production or whatever, haven't turned out quite as nicely. But overall, the line is like 85% there. But I think the other 15% to get it to be like the perfect Star Wars line is definitely within reach. And there's just a little bit that they have to do in order to bring it all up.
And what do you think that is?
Well, personally, from figure to figure, for me, ever since the first series, which the first series had dynamite paint applications, I think. Now, Luke Skywalker in the first series had fantastic paint applications on his face that really brought a lot more dimension to the figure and really brought out the sculpt that was obviously there underneath all that paint. Since then, I use Luke as an example because there's actually been 2 more Luke Skywalker figures that have now officially been released. In Series 3, there was the Bespin Duel Luke, and now in Series 5, we just got the Jedi Luke. And I honestly believe that both of those figures, the sculpt is absolutely there, and the likeness can come out, but they have just not spent the time on production paint applications that they should in order to make these figures really be as good as they can get. And I really want to implore Hasbro to, take a little time, take a little money, because we're paying a premium for these figures, because there have been customizers out there that have been taking these figures under the brush, and then it's like a night and day difference between what they look like with their production paint and with just a little bit more paint applications. Because to me, it seems like the only real paint that we're getting on these human faces anymore are eye paints, and even at that point, they're very, very, very limited.
Yeah, a good example, I guess, was the Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan figure.
Oh, it's not even close.
Yeah. There was a feature on the Fwoosh where, was it you? Who did that repaint? I don't recall now. I think you posted the article, but whoever it was that did the repaint on that, it essentially the same sculpt. I think they also might have cast it slightly larger or smaller.
Yeah, well, but the whole story behind that is that, Obi-Wan and Chewbacca are my 2 favorite Star Wars characters. So I was actually really looking forward to that Series 3 Obi-Wan figure, because say what you will about the prequels, which I'm sure we'll get into, I've always thought Ewan McGregor did a fantastic job portraying both Obi-Wan and Alec Guinness. So his Episode 3 look is actually one that is very near and dear to me. So when that figure actually came out, and obviously it was missing the paint applications on the face, but also the head got shrunken down in production. I actually went to a Fwoosh member who has a casting business on the side named Glassman, and asked him if he would be able to upsize that production Obi-Wan head by about 10%, which he did a fantastic job in accomplishing. And even when that head got back to me unpainted, you could see that the likeness for McGregor was some of the best work that had been done on the line so far. So then when I sent it to Robo and he actually repainted it, gave it some skin tone, gave him some eye detail and whatnot, it's night and day. It doesn't even look like the same figure anymore.
Yeah. But that is often the case with the head sculpts. The paint makes such a difference, such an incredible difference.
Well, and I think Luke's another great example. It's hard to imagine these Luke heads without, maybe removing the paint entirely, because the paint that is on it with the eyes is distracting. But you can see all the lines in the face, the shapes that are used, the Hamill likeness. It's really there. It's just that the paint is not helping it one bit.
Right. Is it, what else would, in your opinion, would give it that last 15% that you were talking about?
Well, another part too is, I'm not one that's screaming for tons and tons of accessories with every single figure, just because I know that that's not a part of the reality anymore. But the decision was made to use soft goods on this line. I was obviously, not thrilled about that at the beginning, but on most of the figures so far, they have been able to prove that it can be done as a way just to augment the figure and not draw too much attention. to the soft goods. So with characters like Darth Maul and the aforementioned Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Anakin Skywalker Jedi figure, the cloth that's been used on them has just kind of been around the skirt piece, I guess I'll call it, so it will allow their leg articulation to remain functional, and that has actually worked quite well. It hasn't distracted from the figures and whatnot, but they make choices like that, but then we don't get any cloth cloaks with our Jedis. So again, we're having to go to a third-party person for this. And then with Darth Vader that was just released, I'll admit that to their, I guess, in their support, Darth Vader, it's very iconic, but he has a very odd-looking costume, especially when you start breaking it down piece by piece. And the cloth that they used for his the skirt piece and the overlay, they just didn't pull that off successfully, in my opinion. And sometimes you can get a pass for that kind of thing, but when we're talking about Darth Vader, that's a big deal for this figure. So I know it's not the last Darth Vader that we're going to get, but I don't think that I liked the choice of the soft goods on the upper torso piece. I think that could have been sculpted and still retained all of the articulation. And then the lower cloak piece or the skirt, whatever you want to call it, there's just too much of it. It needs to be a thinner, piece of cloth and cut smaller or something. But it's just these little decisions that can just be altered slightly that can bring these figures up to a different level, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, from your lips to Hasbro's ears. Another. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. Go ahead. I was going to continue on with Darth Vader because he's got some things going on that are obviously beyond the cloth. But I think paint and the use of soft goods and material choice overall can really help with these guys because even when they do have nice sculpted pieces, sometimes on the upper body with like the Jedi cloaks on Obi-Wan, if it was just made of a little bit softer plastic, it would help retain the arm articulation a little bit. So I really hope that from an engineering and design standpoint, they can look at these and think about what would be more functional and also more aesthetically pleasing as they approach it, because the line is so close. The sculpts are there. Gentle Giant is just knocking these out of the park. And the likenesses are just too good not to be treated to a production cycle that has a standard that would really make them shine.
Yeah, agreed. And hopefully some of that, especially with the cloth goods, is more the learning curve on a new line, which is true for any new line, for any company of any type. There's always going to be a little bit of trial and error when you're starting something new. So hopefully some of the issues that they're encountering with soft goods is that they're going to learn some things they're going to learn from and execute slightly differently, as opposed to it just being economic concerns or budget restraints or something like that.
Right, because I think we would be foolish to be sitting here today on a lovely Sunday and say that this Darth Vader that we just got in Series 5 is going to be the only crack at Darth Vader that we're ever going to get in this line. That's just simply not going to be the case.
Hopefully.
But, I think there's going to be some time in between this one and the next one, which will hopefully give them time to reconsider the material choices overall that they're using on a figure like Vader. So not just the type of cloth that they're using, but where to use it. And also some of the other things with this Vader that have gotten people kind of in a rash at this point. And most of that has to do with the helmet area, how it sits on the neck, and the kind of the shape of the, I guess what you would call the eyes. It has got some people in a bit of a lather. So this is supposed to be, I think, the Return of the Jedi Vader, but his helmet looks a little bit more A New Hope Vader, and it sits too low. So I don't know. Right now, I'm kind of saying, hey guys, give us an Empire Strikes Back Vader that is just perfect, and I'll be good.
Well, the head issue with this Vader is interesting. I think it's a good example of something that I see, that I sort of notice a lot on different figures and other toys and things, where something comes out, and either due to production or manufacturer engineering for whatever reason. There's maybe something just slightly off about it. It could be something minor or it could be something major, but usually when it's something more subtle and it's enough that a collector with a good eye notices that something's just off about it. But it's so subtle sometimes that it's hard to say what exactly is it. A lot of people on this Vader, the knee jerk, looking at it, the knee jerk reaction was that the head seems a bit small. The head's too small, or it's sitting too low or high on the neck, and or maybe it's both. And then someone else pointed out on the boards and I can't remember who it was, but once they pointed this out, I looked at it again and I said, yeah, I think they're right. This is a head that has several pieces to it, obviously. This is the version of Darth Vader where the helmet comes off, so you get the top sort of bell helmet piece and then the front mask piece that both come off of the actual head.
Right,
so,
which is actually very well executed in my opinion. I think the mask fits very well over the face, and the helmet comes down and snaps on together. So all the pieces, I think, work well together. But
but it's interesting because what this person on the boards pointed out was that they didn't think that the head was too small. They thought that just the bell portion, the top, main helmet portion was too small. That the head itself was the right size, and the front, mask portion fit over it at the right, scale, but that the top portion actually was the part that was too small, and if that was slightly larger, you'd get a little bit more of the overhang above the eyes and the way that it flares out around the neck, and that also is maybe an issue where people are feeling that the head isn't sitting at the right height on the neck, that maybe that some of that has to do with the size of the top portion of the helmet, that if it was a little bit larger, it would be flaring out more towards the neck. That would change the way you see where it's sitting on the neck. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think the thing about that we have to recognize is that I remember seeing this iteration of Darth Vader more in a, I guess, prototype state at Toy Fair back in February, and some of these things are not, to me, as immediately present on that early version. So I think you're right. I think it's just making sure that everything is coming out of the molds, and the molds are cut correctly in order to keep the overall proportions together. Now, the conspiracy theorists out there will tell you that Hasbro has a long-standing tradition to never give you one single perfect figure of any character, so they can keep selling you figures. But I dismissed that with this line so far, just because of things that we've gotten with like the Sand Trooper and even Darth Maul. So I really do think that just taking one of the most iconic properties in the world with the most iconic character from that property and giving him the extra attention that he's due is something that should be a priority. And it's little things like that, because let's face it, you're not going to pull anything past a Star Wars fan, and especially a collective of Star Wars fans on the internet. So when you combine that with action figure fans, you're going to deal with some pretty discriminating eyes. Yeah. So this Darth Vader's the type of character that can really start an upswing for a line, or I hate to say downswing, because I don't think it's necessarily going to cause that, but he could have brought Star Wars Black to the next level just on his own, I think. And I think we're kind of just going to keep it par for the course until we have the next real knockout figure released, if that makes sense.
Right. No, I hear you. And, as you say, more than likely this is not our last Darth Vader figure, but it's probably going to be a while before we get to the next one, because for obvious reasons, you want to space those out. So hopefully it's going to have to be on another character's shoulders to come out with that knockout.
Well, one small thing that I could actually do with my meager customizing skills was I actually hit the the dome of Darth Vader's helmet, because to me that should be, you should practically be able to see your reflection in it, because it should be so shiny. But just taking a little bit of Tamiya gloss black paint to that made all the difference in the world with the overall look of it. So that's another small thing that, you know, it's not essential, but it's one of those details that I think Hasbro should really be paying attention to make somebody like Vader perfect, is that he should have a high gloss reflective helmet.
Right.
Because that's the way that it is in the movie.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing, too, is that Hasbro, this is kind of their first major journey into this scale, and especially with Star Wars, which for, you know, a lifetime has been at the 3 3/4 or 4-inch scale. And there's just different issues at play with a 6-inch figure. There's things that you notice. I think that's a good example. You wouldn't necessarily notice as much whether a 4-inch Darth Vader's helmet piece is how shiny it is, as opposed to when you scale up to a 6-inch figure, it all of a sudden becomes kind of a key design element.
Right, absolutely. Well, and you know, you're right. Before, I guess really before Marvel, the Marvel acquisition, Hasbro's foray into the 6-inch scale was fairly non-existent.
Right.
But
and, yeah, you know, I guess I should correct myself, because obviously they've been doing Marvel Legends for quite some time.
And
although the
let's
first,
not lie. Yeah, it took them quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's really not since the relaunch of Marvel Legends, which was just barely 2 years ago, that they've kind of started to click there.
Right.
So.
And the thing is that for the most part, I think Marvel really is clicking. They have a lot of paint applications going on with them now. Not all figures are perfect, but it makes me wonder if we're speaking to kind of siloed teams. Then I don't know how the inner workings of Hasbro's business goes, but I don't know. I would be, you know, asking and sharing, you know, secrets to making things a little bit better in between teams, and I don't really know if that's happening.
Well, it's interesting because I know that from seeing the Toy Fair presentations over the years and talking with the various reps, especially at Toy Fair, because they have a much bigger presence there than they do at some of the other shows. The Hasbro team does, at least historically, trade off between lines. They do rotate, you know, designers, brand managers, etc., between lines much more fluidly than, say, a Mattel or other companies might. So I don't know, but it is interesting. I mean, obviously, they've consolidated a lot of the sculpting for both Marvel and Star Wars under Gentle Giant as sort of a subcontractor. So I don't know. Interesting. It would be interesting to know a little more about how that works behind the scenes.
Well, and all that said, I will say that I absolutely adore this line. I absolutely love it. And even having a Vader that's not completely perfect, at this scale, standing in front of the mob of Stormtrooper figures that I have now, that's an impressive sight to behold, and it's something that I have been waiting for as long as I have been an action figure collector. So I'm not taking anything away from the good points of this line. A 6-inch Han Solo action figure, you know, paint applications aside from the face, it is fantastic. Boba Fett turned out, for the most part, great. The Sand Troopers are awesome. There's a lot of cool stuff that we're getting from the first time, and I want this line to go on and on and on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
But I want it to be just a little bit better, so that you know, we can just be doing nothing but gushing about it every time a figure is released.
Going back to Hasbro's 6-inch world, they, as I said, they are hitting it now with Marvel, and obviously, nitpicks aside, Star Wars Black is the execution is for the most part really top notch. But these are both obviously licensed properties that, you know, Hasbro's paying a tidy fee to produce these figures on top of whatever their costs are.
Right.
I think there are a few properties that collectors would be excited to say the least, to see 6-inch
Are you
figures
hinting at
of.
something?
And there's all kinds of other licensed properties that are begging for 6-inch treatment, but Hasbro's got something right in their own backyard, an in-house property that no license fee would be needed for. It's a property that's been somewhat fallow for the last year and a half in terms of product on the shelf, so it's not like it's something that's at a saturation point. I think you would consider it an evergreen, sort of brand as toy brands go, and that's G.I. Joe, right?
Yeah, this one's got me just expecting G.I. Joe to be the next property that they tackle at this scale, especially since you said, they really haven't been doing a whole lot with it from a toy perspective for the past year or so. Now, I am one of those people that I don't know the property very well. I've never really been into G.I. Joes. I wasn't allowed to be into G.I. Joes when I was a kid. So, but I will tell you that you're right. That property has a potential to make me a first-time Joe collector as well.
Right. Yeah, no, it's definitely. I think, at least if we're going to talk about at least the modern GI Joe. I'm not going back to the original, 12-inch dolls.
Right.
But with the the sort of relaunch in the 80s of the Real American Hero or 4-inch, whatever you want to call it, GI Joes that we know of today, I think the idea behind it is really it's a line based around vehicles. Mm-hmm. So obviously that wants to be a 4-inch line because you're not going to make an F-16 that a 6-inch figure is going to fit in. But that's, while that may be true historically, that brand is so big now that I don't think you're going to see a lot of drop off, in the same way that Star Wars, in the 70s and 80s was about, buying spaceships and things for these figures too. But, I don't think that if you had a G.I. Joe line that was 6 inches, people weren't going to be interested if there wasn't going to be tanks for it. You know what I mean?
No, I think it can exist very much the same way that Star Wars is existing right now.
And I would think that it's also a property that doesn't necessarily need a major media tie-in happening at the moment. I know the movies. I'm not sure if they're done. Are they making another one of those? I'm not sure whether that's the case.
I don't know. I'm sure since the last one, I think maybe made money. Maybe I don't remember. Right. There's probably something in development, but I don't know because I will say that I have not seen a G.I. Joe movie. So
neither have I. Maybe we'll take some flack for that, but I'm not gonna. I regret nothing. But yeah, I would assume that that's a big enough property, both with an entrenched fan base and just general brand recognition, that it doesn't need to have a media tie-in to sell figures. But I don't know, maybe it does, and maybe that's just a testament to Star Wars, that it is such a unstoppable juggernaut. It just goes on forever.
Yeah. I do think the 6-inch action figure collector sect though is ready for their G.I. Joe line, and I think that it's been the pattern of 6-inch action figure collecting has been so long established by this point now that there wouldn't be expectations from that group of collectors for things like vehicles and play sets, because reality is very much set in, I think, with most people who collect 6-inch action figure lines. If you do get vehicles, they're going to be small vehicles. If you do get play sets, they're going to be huge event type of pieces. And it's really come down to the importance of the figure and the characters at that scale. And when you upsize a figure from 3 3/4 inch to 6 inch, there's a lot more that you can do in terms of sculpt and paint and whatnot, just because you have a larger canvas. Now, I'm not taking anything away from 3 3/4, and I think that there's a lot that can be done at that scale that's just amazing. But I think the way that Star Wars has handled it so far, it's been very well defined, the differences between philosophies between the two scales. And to me, that's just something that I would think would be able to roll right over into G.I. Joe, but, I keep thinking the next show, the next big event, they're going to say, all right, here comes your 6-inch Joes. I know there's threads talking about it, not only on the Fwoosh, but in other forums throughout the universe, that people just seem to be expecting it now, and it is something that I would love to see actually happen.
It does seem like a no-brainer. It would be interesting to know why what the holdup is. Maybe it's a question of resources. Hasbro is the second largest American toy manufacturer, but people talk about Mattel and Hasbro sometimes interchangeably as like the big two, but they don't necessarily realize how much smaller Hasbro is than Mattel. It's not like they're bang bang 1 and 2.
Right.
Mattel is much larger company than Hasbro, and Hasbro also downsized significantly about a year ago. So it could be just a question of, we've got this much resources in terms of development, engineering, brand management, etc., into Marvel and Star Wars, and there's nobody left to work on a 6-inch Joe line at the moment. Maybe it's a question of cycling through properties in that way. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, and that's very true. So you're never going to get the story as to why something may or may not be developed from an internal business model or whatnot. But I do think the market's there at this point, and I honestly do believe that, since you're right, that from a toy perspective, Joe's been lying a little dormant for the past year and a half. This might be just the type of thing to, if not to re-energize the 3 3/4 inch scale, but maybe bring in some customers, like me, who has never really purchased a Joe figure in his entire life, but would at the scale that I actually prefer.
Right, and I remember a couple years ago, for many years before the 6-inch Star Wars stuff was even announced, people were always asking for 6-inch Star Wars stuff, and one of the things we heard, and I don't know if we ever actually heard it from someone in the industry or at Hasbro, but one of the things that was bandied about, at least by collectors and particularly some Star Wars collectors, was that they could never do a 6-inch Star Wars line because Star Wars fans want their stuff 4-inch scale. That it would just never fly. That you couldn't sell Star Wars stuff in that scale. That's not what the Star Wars collector. Well, I think we put that to rest, right? I mean, this line has been a pretty good success so far.
Yeah, I guess I would agree and not agree with that statement. I do think there are plenty of 3 3/4 scale collectors who have been with Star Wars since the late 70s who aren't interested in a different scale, and I think that's totally fair. But at the same time, I think there are collectors out there who love Star Wars but have never really taken much of an interest in Star Wars action figure collecting because maybe that's not their scale of choice. I had just a handful of Star Wars figures before the Black Series started, and now I've bought a lot of multiples because of army builders or whatnot, but I have more Star Wars figures now in the past year and a half than I've ever owned in my entire life because it's hit this scale. That doesn't make me any less of a Star Wars fan. It's just I've always enjoyed Star Wars, but I haven't been a fan of the figures. But now they've got me.
Right, and I would assume that would pretty much cross over with the G.I. Joe fan base as well. Because that's something that I think people have also said about G.I. Joe is that it's always been again 12-inch original 70s G.I. Joes aside, it's always been a 4-inch line, and Joe collectors want their stuff at 4-inch, etc. And yeah, I'm sure there's guys that have been collecting for 25 years that aren't interested in a whole new scale, but I don't think that means there isn't room for a 6-inch G.I. Joe scale for sure. And especially when you think of the nature of the characters, and there's a lot of collectors that like to mix up their collections and mix and match displays, etc., especially within a scale. And you talk about, a lot of G.I. Joe characters are essentially, army guys.
Absolutely.
Marvel, DC, etc., 6-inch collector doesn't want a bunch of 6-inch army guys.
Well, that's exactly right. You've got grunts that Wolverine can claw through, or ninjas. I mean, let's face it. 2 of G.I. Joe's most popular characters are ninjas. So,
Right.
And Cobra isn't, as far as I know, at any loss for troops and whatnot. So, it's one of those things that I know a lot of Star Wars collectors will buy characters or figures from other lines just to kind of supplement their Star Wars collections and vice versa and whatnot. So even I think if you've got a Marvel guy who's not necessarily interested in G.I. Joe, but he's interested in getting some ninjas for, people to destroy, you've got that person then as well.
Yeah, customizers, etc. I'm sure customizers in the scheme of things are a pretty small amount of any market, but still, it's out there. It's another segment. So I'd be interested to see what happens with that. It is interesting just to talk about 6-inch figures in general, because not too long ago, it really seemed like that we might be done with 6-inch figures. Basically.
Yeah, I was nervous there for a while.
yeah, there was a window of time when Mattel's DC line was really kind of holding on by the skin of its teeth, and then eventually died totally. And it really seemed, and a lot of people, Mattel got a lot of hurt, from the fan community for their line. But I always kind of cut them a lot of slack, because I really started to feel that the problem was that the bar had gotten raised so high for 6-inch figures in terms of articulation, sculpt, paint apps, accessories, all the works, that to produce a figure that met those expectations, you couldn't do it at mass retail for a $20 price point anymore. That you would have to go to the specialty market, the hot toys type of thing. That it would take some company like NECA or an import company to do a figure like that, and it would cost $50.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I thought, what's Mattel supposed to do? They just can't make a figure that fans want. Can't be made for the price that people will buy it at. Because at mass retail, you do have to sell to non-collectors, and when you get above the $20 price point, it can be a little unreasonable. However, then Hasbro, in the last year and a half, really been knocking it out of the park with Marvel, with Star Wars. Now, again, Star Wars is that strange kind of anomaly of a perennial evergreen license that just will never die at any price, at any scale. And Marvel has, Hasbro's obviously reaping the benefits of some really successful movie franchises there. So I don't know if 6-inch mass retail figures are still out of the woods, but certainly we have a lot more hope now. And on that topic, I just wanted to mention that this whole Walgreens exclusive situation.
I have
and again,
been, I feel like such a creep going into 4 or 5 Walgreens on an almost daily basis.
Oh, that you go into the same ones on a daily, more than once a day?
Well, no, not more than once a day. But
Right.
I've been there. There's a Walgreens that is very, very near my house that I have been into almost daily. And those stores are small enough that it's like, man, how many days in a row are you going to come into this store and not buy anything? But,
Well, it could be worse. I mean, they don't put the toys on the condom aisle, so at least you're not like walking by the condoms every day and looking at them and leaving. But I remember there was a Rite Aid by my house back, 5, 7, 8 years ago. 10 years ago maybe. It seems like only yesterday. But they used to carry Marvel Legends back when Marvel Legends were about $10.
Right.
And because I lived way out in a neighborhood, way out of the way, and it was just a small kind of Rite Aid that got, get like, a case every few months, of figures. But sometimes they'd get like a variant case. And, there were no other collectors in my neighborhood. Nobody, was caring about this stuff. So I'd walk in there and be like, oh yeah, here's an entire case of variants, all of them out, stuff like that. It was kind of like Christmas. It was like the magic Rite Aid. And, obviously then when the price point got to a certain point, Rite Aid got out of the game because they don't have a toy section. They have a rack of toys for people to grab on impulse to quiet an angry kid. So anything over $10, they're, forget it, the piece
right.
out. And, so not only did my Magic Rite Aid go away, but that was also just a source of toys and legends, in general that dried up. It was all the sort of drugstores and secondary retailers that stopped carrying that stuff. And then along comes Walgreens.
Yeah.
And says, who, doesn't have a toy department. They're a drugstore like, CVS or any of these other places. But now they're going to get these exclusives. And again, it's Hasbro again. We're talking Hasbro today. Star Wars and Marvel. They've got the Venom, the Flash Thompson Venom exclusive. Which is that coming in a wave of Spider-Man Infinite Legends, or are they just getting those like single character to a case?
I think maybe it's both. I don't know for sure though, because the Walgreens in my area have not hit with the Hasbro stuff yet, so I haven't been actually able to not only not find what I've been looking for, but also not be able to see what else is being included. Now I think Boba Fett has been confirmed that he's within a mix of
he's
what
in a
we
mix.
would call a Series 5 case, but I don't know about Venom, because I'll be honest, I haven't been paying quite as close attention to Venom, because that's not really an iteration of Venom that I'm interested in getting. But yeah,
but I mean, it surely is a sign of hope that a retailer like Walgreens is not only interested in carrying 6-inch figures that cost $20. I don't know what they're retailing for at Walgreens, but the suggested retail on these guys is usually between $19.99 and $21.95 or something. But not only are they getting back into it, but they are commissioning exclusives.
Well,
so,
I think that kind of started, well, at least where I started to take notice was with Funko, actually, in their Game of Thrones line. Walgreens actually has an exclusive Tyrion Lannister in his Hand of the King outfit, which was actually, that was really the version of Tyrion that I think that I wanted from Funko from the very beginning. So
I think most people, yeah.
Right. So that was kind of a like, wow, okay, I've got to start checking out Walgreens. And I have to say that once they got them, that made it extremely easy for me to get my hands on Tyrion. Now, Matt Kay actually found one while I was in San Diego at San Diego Comic-Con at Walgreens. So, I came home from Comic-Con with one thanks to Matt finding an extra one for me. But, it wasn't a week later that at the Walgreens just down from my house, they had plenty of them. So I'm hoping that it's just a case now of they haven't gotten in their Boba Fett's yet around where I'm at, and once they do, it's not going to be such a pain. But I used to be scared to death of store exclusives. Some of them still kind of frighten me, but anymore it's kind of, well, if it gives me a chance to get this character or maybe this cool iteration of a character that I wouldn't be able to otherwise get, then I can't really argue with it. And Walgreens was unexpected, but welcome to the insanity, I guess.
Welcome to the party, Walgreens. We've only got a couple here in the city, but I'm gonna have to start hitting them up. If they start, I'm still waiting for my Chewbacca to land into my pile of loot at Big Bad Toy Store.
Yeah, he's worth the wait. I love Chewie.
So rather than, I'm not going to search him out at Walgreens because I've got the pre-order in. But and I've always felt the same way about exclusives, and especially con exclusives, which are particularly more difficult for the most part to get your hands on. People always say oh, I hate con exclusives. They shouldn't have done. But I always figure if it's the difference between something getting made at all or not, I'd rather have something exist. At least if it exists, even if it was done as a con exclusive, even if I've got to pay a premium to get it on eBay or whatever, at least it exists, so I could get it rather than it not existing at all.
Right.
And I've had that conversation sometimes on the boards, and some people say, "No, I'd rather have it not exist at all." I don't know if I mean, what's the I think a lot of times people don't understand that's the choice, that it's not a matter of they were going to make this and they chose not to sell it at retail, they chose to hold it back for a convention exclusive. That's not the way these things happen. They make something specifically to be a convention exclusive. It's usually something that they can't do for the retail market. So
Right. So, if this is the way to get me prototype Boba Fett, which, that figure doesn't really have... I don't really have a huge need for that figure in my, overall Star Wars display, because it's just not something that is essential to anything canon, I suppose. But that figure is slick. I love the kind of background on him, so he's a must-have for me. So
and anybody that wants to build an army of Mandalorian soldiers.
Oh, that's true,
that's
too.
a good blank slate for that, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But speaking of essential characters in Star Wars Black, so we've gotten at this point now, if you count figures that are actually out or that at least have been announced, we've pretty much got at least one version of all the main characters. We've got Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie, Darth Vader and his stormtroopers. We've got, Yoda has been shown. We've got Jabba the Hutt, R2-D2. We've got an Obi-Wan Kenobi. Maybe not the most, representative one, but we've got an Obi-Wan Kenobi, even an Anakin. The guy we're missing, the last A-list character that we don't have yet is C-3PO.
Right.
And it's funny because we could circle back to all the different things you were talking about, of those last little touches that might bring the line over the top. I'm really interested to see how they're going to handle C-3PO, because obviously this is a character where the smaller figures have often been done with vac metallization, so you've got that layer of reflective metallic surface rather than just being painted metallic, which is a huge difference. There's no way you can, some metallic painted figures have come out pretty nice, but there's really no match for it,
right?
For doing the metallization. But of course, on an articulated figure, that's very difficult, and especially a figure in that size. It's expensive. It's easier to do on a 4-inch figure. Now, C-3PO is not a character that needs to have all kinds of crazy articulation. I mean, the actual character is very limited in how he can move. But,
right.
But there's still joints involved. There's still a lot going on there. How do they approach that? That's going to be interesting.
I have to say that in 95% of the cases, I would say skip the vac metal and just let me have, a shiny gold C-3PO, because it looks... Generally, I find that vac metal has a specific effect that it can accomplish. And being the most detailed in terms of paint goes, that's not really it. However...
Right.
3PO is a tough one, because I'm extremely torn, and I would not be surprised one bit that this is one of the reasons why we have not seen him yet. Now, he's heavily rumored for being, either the sculpt being done or blah, 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 or he's coming sooner rather than later, and that's fine, okay, but I wouldn't be surprised if this whole paint conundrum is a reason why we haven't seen him yet, because I really don't know what I would prefer.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I mean, I think just making a decision like this in a vacuum, if you were to ask me what's my preference, I definitely want it. I would definitely want the vac metallization. When I picture what these might look like in my mind,
right,
that's the one I want. There's no comparison.
Yeah.
But I'm open. If they show me something that is painted, if they can do something that is better than what I'm imagining, I'm open to it. I'm not, I'm definitely open to it, but it, they got to show me. So I don't know, interesting. But I also, I want him to have at least a sort of equivalent articulation to the other characters in the line. I don't need it. Again, doesn't have to be crazy, and he can definitely have cut shoulders, because the character's shoulders don't move up and down, really. So I'm good with that, etc. But I don't know. But as you say, it's tough to get the subtlety on the vac metallization. You can't really do a wash over it or anything like that. You get what you get. You get the reflective. You get the shine. But you're looking at some of the, in my imagination, I'm using what they've done with the 4 inches in the past. and I'm using that as my guide. And they've done C-3PO both ways in the 4-inch line in recent history, and the painted ones, it just doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
It doesn't do it.
I agree. So it's tough, and I guess maybe with C-3PO, then you do get away with it a little bit more because you're right. I don't expect an action figure that is more articulated than the actual character was.
Right, exactly.
So one of the things that you talk about, shoulders and whatnot, and shoulder ball joints. That's obviously one of those articulation areas that make something like vac metal extremely difficult to do because there's a lot of parts and movement and rub that goes on in the shoulder area. So if you're just giving cut shoulders to help more accurately represent the character, and just by virtue it makes it much more easy to have vac metal used on a joint like that, then so be it. So I guess my want is that I do want vac metal, but I don't want it to be a dip in any type of paint quality or detail. So if they can do it, gosh, let's do it. But I'm a little nervous about 3PO, but we'll see. Again, though, as I've said in the past, that I always like my figures to be bathtub, ready. I'm not really able to take that route with this line yet with a lot of the figures. So if they do the vac metal, I'm sure that, and it does sacrifice some of the other paint details or something like that, I'm positive that many of the talented customizers and artists out there in internet land will be able to show us the light of what we need to do in order to enhance C-3PO, because I can't really put him out on his own when it comes to things like that, when I have, even a Han Solo that I think needs a little face paint.
Right. Well, it should be interesting. And there's no doubt in my mind that one of the reasons that he's the last of the A-listers is because, them weighing, how to approach all these questions. But surely they can't put it off for too long. He is the last. He's the last A-lister that we don't have any version of. And he is my second favorite Star Wars character.
Is he really?
So, he is. Chewbacca, number 1. C-3PO, number 2.
Wow. I did not know that. I knew Chewbacca was number 1 because he's pretty much, 1.5 for me. But I did not know that C-3PO was your second favorite Star Wars character. It's always interesting to hear for the first time someone's favorite characters in any given property. So I learned something today.
Well, and C-3PO, not a common character to be a favorite of people.
Especially after the prequel trilogy.
Oh God, please.
Again.
But I'll tell you what, when I was I think 5 years old, 5 or 6, I was C-3PO for Halloween.
Really?
And this was one of those Halloween costumes which you may barely remember if you reach all the way back to your childhood, which was a cardboard mask and a vinyl poncho.
Yeah.
And with the poncho basically said Star Wars on it.
I had a plastic mask and kind of this. It wasn't a poncho. It was that thin vinyl that kind of like had sleeves and it tied around you in the back. I was a gremlin one year, probably about when I was 5 or so. So I definitely know the costume style that you're talking about.
So I was C-3PO for Halloween, and the next day. The day after Halloween, All Saints Day, I guess it must have been. It must have been a Saturday or something because I didn't have school, and I just decided that I wasn't really done. I liked the costume. I was into Halloween, so my mom let me put it on, and I went to a couple of our neighbors' house the next morning, afternoon, did a little more trick or treating.
Nice. Nice. So that was a costume that got probably about double the mileage, at least in terms of days go from normal Halloween costumes, because no kid is going to allow their parents to let them be the same person 2 years in a row.
So true. But C-3PO. Also, correct me if I'm wrong. Is he the only character to appear in all 6 films?
Well, I mean, I guess you got to count R2. as well.
Oh no, I guess I should say the only actor.
Oh, okay.
Anthony Daniels is
Right.
the only actor to appear in all 6. Because also you got Obi-Wan Kenobi in all 6,
Right.
as well.
Right,
even as a
right.
ghost, but-
So yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think Daniels is the only one because he wasn't all CGI in episode 1, was he?
No, he in episode 1 I think he was, but his
voice,
but his voice, and also he was a patron in the bar.
Oh, that's...
Oh no, that's episode 2.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
still,
Yeah, that's the
he
death
was-
sticks.
Yes, yeah, he's in that scene. But I don't know. I don't think. Hopefully, there's some ardent Star Wars fans that will correct us if I'm wrong. But I don't think he physically is in Episode 1. But at least as a voice actor, obviously he is. Unfortunately, Kenny Baker passed away before the prequels. Yeah, who played R2D2.
No, I think he's still alive.
Oh no, he's not alive now. I don't think.
He's...
But was he alive for the prequel? God, isn't that awful? That I shouldn't even bring that up if I don't know.
Dude, I think he's still alive.
Oh God, I'm sorry, Mr. Baker. You were a key influence of my childhood.
Yeah, he's still alive. I think he was either in the picture or in one of the pictures of that they've been leaking out.
You're right. I think you're right. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, Mr. Baker. But did he? Was there any practical R2D2 in the prequels, or by then was the technology such that it was all
No,
either CGI?
I think there was. I think there were some practical R2s in the prequels as well. So he was the one that I was wondering about when you said that. I was like, well, I think he's actually been in all of them as well. But yeah, he and Daniels are the only two.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. You know what? He is still alive. He just had a birthday like a week ago. He's 80 years old. God bless Kenneth George Baker from Birmingham, West Midlands.
We apologize for our lack of research.
I know. I'm such a great Star Wars fan. Dear Fwooshcast, I am writing to correct you in your egregious error of September the 7th, 2014. Mr. Kenneth Baker is still alive and well and will reprise his role as R2-D2 in Episode 7 to be released on December 18th, 2015.
So, yeah, he's going to go and get it.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good to know. Good to know. Well, I guess speaking of prequels and sequels, we've had some prequel characters. Okay. Nick, let's talk prequels.
Let's talk prequels. I'm not afraid to talk prequels, and I am not afraid to admit what I like from the prequels. So let's talk.
All right, I'm going to tell you what I like about prequels.
Okay.
And then I want to hear what you like about it. I want to tell you first because I don't want to feel like that whatever I say is influenced by what you say. Because I want you to know that I'm being frank. So, obviously, this is a huge thing in the world. Everyone hates the prequels except for the people that don't.
Yeah.
And so, okay, I think this is also a question of generation because there are people who, the first Star Wars they saw was Episode 1,
right? Or
at least the first one they saw in the theater, and so there's all kinds of. This is very complicated to unpack.
Right.
For me, I was a huge Star Wars fan. If you had to pick one genre / geek, whatever property, and say, what am I the biggest fan of? It would be tough to say I was a bigger fan of Star Wars than I am of quote unquote comic books generally. But if you were, if you didn't count comic books as an all-encompassing thing, if you had to narrow that down into like specific characters or whatever, then for sure Star Wars. Like that's my biggest thing.
Right.
You wouldn't necessarily know it from my toy collecting today because I'm more of a superhero guy, but Star Wars, Star Wars, huge influence. And sure, anybody my age, I was born in the 70s, so
it was the first. I can go on and on about Star Wars. It was the first thing that I knew a lot about. If that makes any sense,
Yeah.
as a child, yeah, and there's something about that. I've often thought, what is it about Star Wars that so many people? Because there's all kinds of things that you like as a kid,
Right.
And what is it about Star Wars that, especially people, my age, roughly, just forever stays with them like nothing else? And I think it's the first thing that we knew a lot about, and it sort of felt. Unconsciously, but it sort of felt mature in some way to know all these different characters and how they related and, trivia and stuff. Anyway, that I don't want to bore you with all that stuff, but just to say, I'm a huge Star Wars fan. So Episode 1, Phantom Menace, came out when I was a grown-ass man. And I've never looked forward to a movie more than that. Went to the first... I went to the midnight show with a bunch of people. It was a crazy raucous. I went to the 10 a.m. show the next day to immediately see it again, and I didn't hate it.
Yeah.
When I first saw it, there were some things that I was a little bit, meh about. Some of the kid stuff, some of the Jar Jar Binks stuff, but it didn't ruin the experience for me because there was so much satisfaction, and admittedly a lot of this totally fan service, but Obi-Wan Kenobi meeting Anakin Skywalker and seeing the genesis of C-3PO and some of these things was very cool. And I had you hadn't seen these characters who were, for me and for many of us, a huge part of our lives. Hadn't seen them on screen, although just a few years before that the movies had been re-released, but hadn't seen them in any new material for most of our lives. So just that experience of seeing a new Star Wars movie, the bad things about it weren't bad enough to torpedo that for me.
Right.
On repeated viewings years later, Phantom Menace holds up less and less for me. Although in a lot of ways I think it's still the strongest overall film of the three prequels. The second movie I had some pretty good expectations for, because I thought, well, what I didn't like about the first one was some of the kiddie stuff.
Right.
The Anakin and Jar Jar, and I thought, well, they got that out of the way. So Episode 2, it's the Clone Wars, right? So this is going to be good. And that was the movie where I was like, on viewing it in the theaters, I was like, boy, I was a little torn. It sort of felt like two movies. It felt like there was the movie about the Clone Wars, and then there was this awful movie about this romance between these two people with zero chemistry.
Yeah.
One of whom was just an awful, awful person. And it was sort of, I really liked, that Clone Wars movie. Can we edit out all the other stuff? But that was the first one of the prequels where I even, seeing it in the movie theater, I thought, boy, I don't know. And then the third one, I kind of felt the same way as the second one, but even more so, because then, there was just, I don't know. There was a lot wrong with it, but which has been well covered by, the entire world over the last 20 years. But so I would say, how do I feel about the prequels? I don't really like the prequels, but I don't necessarily need to completely pretend they don't exist, blah blah blah. But yeah, I'll take my original trilogy.
Well, I don't disagree with you as far as the original trilogy goes. There's just not really much of a comparison between the two. But I'm still the type of person that I like to take what I enjoy from things and then maybe not completely set aside, but not maybe concentrate so much on the things that I don't like about something. I just feel that my time is better spent concentrating on the things that I really do enjoy about something. So while you're right, I would have been fine never to have had Anakin Skywalker as a 10-year-old or however old he was in the Phantom Menace. I've got to pick on C-3PO a little bit, your guy in Episode 1 as much, because I think he was just as bad as anything that Jar Jar and Anakin had to offer. But I don't spend a lot of time in that place. Where I spend my time in is thinking that how amazing I thought Ewan McGregor was in portraying Obi-Wan Kenobi, a very young Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a very young Alec Guinness. Because let's face it,
dead on.
He portrayed Obi-Wan and Alec Guinness in all of those movies. So I will say that, and I've said it before. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ewan McGregor, from start to finish in those prequel movies, I think is, even though he was only doing the best with what he had to work with at times, he was pretty unflappable in those movies as far as his portrayal goes. But I loved the Obi-Wan stuff. I liked Qui-Gon Jinn. I thought Liam Neeson was a great older, sagely kind of is it fair to call him kind of like the leftist Jedi that was out there?
Well, or maybe it's at least sort of like the libertarian Jedi or something.
Yeah.
But if nothing else, Phantom Menace gave us a Liam Neeson who was interested in doing action films, and nobody on the planet right now does an action film better than Liam Neeson. I'll see Liam Neeson in any piece of crap action movie. That guy, I mean, he's such a fantastic actor, but he can just bring weight and gravitas to like anything.
Yeah. So Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, their relationship, of course the final duel from Episode 1 is still the best fight.
Best fight.
Yeah.
Best lightsaber duel in all 6 movies, hands down.
Yeah.
I've seen people try to argue it, and I don't understand how they can argue it, because now for sure the Darth Vader Luke Skywalker fight, both of the fights, in the one in Empire and the one in Jedi, dramatically, in terms of the narrative,
they carry a lot of weight. Absolutely,
they carry a lot of weight. There's a lot going on there besides the fight. And to a certain degree, you could even say that about the Obi-Wan Darth Vader fight in Star Wars. But as fights, and especially the Obi-Wan Darth Vader fight in Star Wars, I mean, you've got, it's by necessity. You've got David Prowse, who's a very big athletic guy, but he's in this completely restrictive costume, which he can barely lift his arm. He's like John McCain. He can't lift his arms above his chest, and he's supposed to be like a grandmaster. But and they solved that, to their credit, in Empire and Jedi, where he starts using the Force a lot more, and it's not all about the swordplay. And then you've got Alec Guinness. He's just some old dude, great actor, but they're like, so you're going to fight with a laser sword.
Right.
And he's like, what?
Yeah.
Where's the check? But like, that is not a fight. And Empire is better and Jedi's fine, but as a fight and the prequel fights, we won't even go there. The set from Episode 2 and 3. But the Phantom Menace, the 3-way, that fight, how could anyone say that's not hands down the best fight?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and that what I like from properties is what really dictates what I want from an action figure standpoint. Even though it seems like unofficially Star Wars Black is starting to lean further away from the prequels. And we've heard rumors that Lucasfilm is saying don't do it, blah 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 blah. I don't know if I completely believe that. But when it comes to action figures, man, I want my Padawan Obi-Wan. I want my Qui-Gon Jinn, because I got a Darth Maul sitting on my shelf right now that is superposable and a great figure that is dying to be fighting 2 Jedi right now.
And there's also some really toyetic characters, even if
the
they weren't
Jedi
necessarily
in general. I mean, they weren't they didn't get the time that I wanted them to have. They didn't get the fighting that I wanted them to have, or this, whatever. But they looked cool, and you can kind of fill in choose your own adventure with them a little bit, especially if you have action figures.
And even a character like General Grievous, who I think is kind of a wasted character in the prequels, because it doesn't really, he's sort of like wedged in there and doesn't really make any sense, like who he is or what he's supposed to be doing. And from what I understand,
he has a lot more to do in the cartoon, in the Clone Wars cartoon. But I remember when he first appeared in the movie, thinking, well, "What the hell is that?" You know.
Yeah.
However, as a toy, boy, he'd be a kick-ass toy.
Oh yeah, and and I want my Christopher Lee as well, because I mean, even though again they just dispatched him, he was thrown away in episode 3. The character, I mean, it's Christopher Lee, so I'll come out and admit I'm a mark for him in anything. So just take that for what it is. But then again,
what if Christopher Lee and Charles Dance were in a movie?
Oh my God, my head would explode.
Do you know I met Charles Dance on the street?
Did you?
About a year or two ago. I was with my friend Jason, who has never watched Game of Thrones in his life, but is a huge fan of Charles Dance from his stage work and stuff. And we were actually outside of Walgreens, to bring it all full circle. And I didn't even... this was like towards the end of the first season of Game of Thrones. So... we passed by him, and I didn't notice him in 1,000 years. Totally nondescript.
Right.
I think he might have been doing a play in New York at the time. My friend was like, "Holy shit! It's Charles Dance! It's Charles Dance!" And admittedly, that even the name didn't resound. I was like, "Charles Dance, that's familiar. Who is that? Who is that?" And he's like, "Look!" And then I was like, "Oh, Lannister!"
Yeah.
And my friend, like, embarrassingly, like, he was like, "I gotta tell him how much I like him." And I was like, "Jesus Christ, come on, man." So he dragged me. He's like, "Mr. Dance, Mr. Dance." I just gotta say, I'm a huge fan. I loved your Richard III, blah blah. Like Charles Dance is expecting to hear all about
Tywin,
who's gonna be king at the end, blah blah blah. My friend is never far from a Game of Thrones fan as ever, but he's like, your Coriolanus in 1991 was like seminal, blah 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 blah, And Charles Dance was like, "Oh, well, thank you very much. It's very nice to hear that."
Yeah, but I mean, could you imagine Charles Dance as the next iteration of like the Sith?
I mean, you couldn't do better. You couldn't do better. He'd be perfect. And I'm holding out some hope for episode 7 because despite the miscues of the prequels, Lucas is less personally involved, and I kind of have always, as a backseat driver, kind of felt like he was part of what went wrong with and it's so ironic to get down on Lucas because the dude created the whole thing to begin with. You know what I mean? Like, we wouldn't have Star Wars without George Lucas, but he, I feel like his talents are, an overall vision as a producer, as a technical innovator. But he's not a writer. He's not a director.
Well, and I think part of that too, and I haven't created anything that has taken the world by storm or anything from that matter. But I think too, it's difficult for people sometimes to come to grips with the fact that once you gift this planet something that is so beloved by so many people, it's really hard to make the assertion that it is just your property anymore, and it belongs to everybody in some way. Yeah, you're cashing the checks from Hasbro, people like that. But it's kind of the difference between that kind of insular creator vision and what it has become beyond that. That I think was one of the things that threw a monkey in the wrench of the interpretation of a lot of things as we moved into the prequels and whatnot.
Yeah, but there's definitely some good people on board.
Yeah.
Creative wise with episode 7, and the casting looks great as far as I can tell. I guess the question in my mind is, what more is there to say with this story, in the sense that there's been 6 Star Wars, it's Star Wars, it's fantastic, et cetera, but when there always has to be something new.
Right.
Or else what's the point? You don't want to... It's not like, with Rocky, where the first, 4 movies is basically the same movie over and over. I mean, the first 2 Rocky movies, almost frame by frame, are the exact same movie, except for the last 5 minutes.
Right.
You know what I mean? But,
I'm telling you, I'm kind of taking a hands-off approach to it, so I am not really... I'm purposely not staying abreast of every brand new rumor or possible set leak or whatever, just because I'm gonna just let it happen and see where it goes. I know people do have a lot of hope riding on this, and like you said, with the talent that's kind of involved in front of and behind the camera, there's really no reason not to be. But I'm going to approach it differently this time and be like, all right, I'm not going to come in with any type of expectation, or they haven't been talking about because Lucas kind of hinted at all this stuff happened before A New Hope. There has not been any of that build up for this movie, so it has that to its advantage. I think that it's
right. Yeah, they're not beholden to any. It doesn't have to lead to anyone.
Right. They're coming in with more of a clean slate, but at the same time, the expectations are not any lower than they have ever been. So it'll be interesting. I'm. It sounds weird to be saying this because I'm so not this type of person, but when it was announced that Disney had acquired Lucasfilm, I wasn't sad about that, and I'm not one to be like, this one giant company is going to own everything and blah 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 blah. That type of thing really kind of sticks with me. But Disney's actually done a really good job with both Marvel and now seemingly Star Wars, and just helping get the right people in the right place and letting the people who know these things
it really started with Pixar.
Yeah.
If you think about it, they acquired Pixar quite some time ago, and were smart enough, and that I would think it would be even more tough because Disney is an animation studio when it comes down to it, and that's what Pixar was killing them in that sector. You would think that absolutely Disney was going to come and put their stamp on it and everything.
Mouse ears on the Vader helmet.
You're right. But they were really smart. They were like, no, we're acquiring Pixar because they're fantastic at what they do. So why would we mess with what they're doing?
Right.
That's been the template with how they've treated Marvel, and hopefully now with Lucas.
Well, and towards that end, it gives them a bigger circle of talent and things to work with, and let Kathleen Kennedy or whoever at Lucasfilm kind of be the Kevin Feige of the overall architect of where things are kind of going. But it gives us chances to get these more pointed movies too, which I guess they call them spin-offs, but I don't think I would call them spin-offs. I guess I'd call them more supplementary films that focus in on specific characters and whatnot, and they've announced some of those. I really don't have a whole lot of interest in having Boba Fett fleshed out anymore at this point, but of course they were going to do that. But that's another one that kind of gets me. It's like, Ewan McGregor again, he's the perfect age to do a almost Western style Obi-Wan movie on Tatooine. It's like, come on, guys, let's do that. McGregor said he would come back and play Obi-Wan again. This is the perfect opportunity. So I think they have some opportunities with those supplementary films as well to do some cool stuff.
Yeah, well, and we'll see.
And it will allow the episode 7, 8, and 9 to kind of find its own direction and not necessarily be beholden to what happened before. If you've got these other films that are kind of fleshing out or going in directions that are based off of a lot of things from the past as well. Right.
Well, they certainly have that more or less 20 years between episodes 3 and 4 for characters like Obi-Wan that that's wide open. I mean, I'm sure there's been the expanded universe stuff written about it, novels or something, because there's nothing they haven't touched. But in terms of the canon, there's nothing. We don't know anything about from the end of episode 2 to the beginning of episode 4, really, about Obi-Wan.
Right.
You could write anything in there. It's 20 years.
Right.
And there's other characters, the same thing.
So yeah,
there's a lot to explore there.
I'm cautiously optimistic about what the future is going to hold for Star Wars in the cinematic universe, and I just hope...
And how would you feel about getting Episode 7 figures in Star Wars Black?
I don't necessarily have anything against that. I'm not going to sit here and say though that I still need my Lando Calrissian from Empire. I still need a lot of iterations of various characters from the original trilogy in Star Wars Black, and I need a lot of the I need a lot of the characters from the prequel trilogies as well, or versions. I want every single Obi-Wan ever Okay, so I'll take that. There's some Jedi that I want out there. I want a Chris Lee. I want a General Grievous. I want.
What's the most obscure, nerdy character? Star Wars character.
I've got to tell you, and this is crazy because when we talk about things like comics and or Masters of the Universe and stuff like that, I've got all of these characters that are like Z-list that I'm absolutely in love with, that I absolutely have a figure of. With me, it doesn't quite go as deep with Star Wars as that, which is crazy because there's been a figure of everybody in Star Wars. But I'm gonna get if I'm gonna have my Obi-Wans and my Chewbacca's and my Han Solos taken care of, then it's kind of some of the more out there ones, I guess, which aren't really even out there by Star Wars fans level of how you would grade something like that. But you get into like the Admiral Akbars and the Neen Nubs and characters like that are just
Admiral Akbar.
Yeah, they're the wacky Kirby characters of the Star Wars universe. Those are the ones that I would get. I'd probably buy 3 or 4 Admiral Akbar figures just to have in various places throughout my house. The Rancor Keeper, whatever his name is.
Right.
I've got a little bit of a story behind that. That was one of those figures that when we were in high school, one of my friends who had an old Star Wars collection, for some reason he would take his Rancor Keeper figure and he would hide it in various places throughout his house for his dad to find. Like in the medicine cabinet or somewhere like that. And he and his dad, they never spoke about it, but his dad would always hide it, and his dad would always find it and then throw it back down into the basement. So that's kind of why the Rancor Keeper is one of those fairly obscure characters that, is kind of like, oh, I've got to have him just for that story.
Well, hopefully the line makes it that long. You know what I bet our best chance for a Star Wars Black 6-inch Rancor Keeper, whose name, correct me if I'm wrong, is Malakili?
I would believe it, yes.
All right. I think is if we get a Rancor.
Yeah.
As a pack-in with a Rancor, I think that's probably our best chance for him.
And, after getting a Wampa and a Tauntaun, they're not as big as the Rancor, obviously, but
right.
You
But
never
still,
know. I didn't think we would be getting a Wampa, especially so quickly. So
or a Tauntaun.
I know. And the speeder bikes, I still got to find the speeder bike. I haven't found one of those yet.
I've seen those. I saw those at my Toys R Us, and then there was a whole wall of them, or maybe not a whole wall, but like an end cap size, display of them. And then the next time that I went, just a couple days later, they were gone completely. And it's hard with my Toys R Us. They do. Most of even though it's like a flagship store, most of the real estate is taken up with a giant Ferris wheel.
Yeah.
So they actually don't have a lot of room for toys.
Yeah.
So they do rotate things out. So it's interesting. Sometimes stuff will disappear, and you'll think, "Oh, that's sold out," and then it'll kind of pop back up, the next week in another part of the store, and you could tell that it's the same stock.
Right.
So I don't know if that happened with the speeder bikes or if they sold through. But because also the other side of that end cap was the Han Greedo 2-pack.
Oh, I can find plenty of those.
And those also disappeared, and I'm pretty sure those didn't sell through.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but interesting. Well, gosh, I mean, we could go on for a million more years. I mean, I kind of wanted to talk about Mafex and Revoltech Star Wars stuff, but maybe we'll save that for a future installment.
Well, that just speaks to Star Wars, and I think the way that they're handling the marketing of this license is where a lot of companies are going with their intellectual properties, is that they're just slicing it up into very, very specific categories for licensees to take. So if you can't find what you like with Star Wars Black or even the standard Star Wars 3 3/4 lines, there may be something from one of those companies that will speak to you. So
for sure,
it's definitely a good time to be a Star Wars collector. And like I said, I love the Black series. There are a few things that I hope that they can improve on from a production standpoint, because the sculpts are, you can't mess with those. What Gentle Giant is doing is absolute perfection. But if they can get that production stuff up to par, it's going to be the best line out there. And they're so close right now. I just a little bit better.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll see. hopefully, it's you never know really what you're going to see from Hasbro in terms of reveals at cons and things, because they're sort of hit and miss. They tend to be a little tight-lipped. They don't really show stuff until
Right.
they're they don't while they don't attend New York Comic Con in October. They usually do have a collector event like the night before, which we will be at, or I will be at for sure. So hopefully we'll see something new there. Bosk and Yoda were revealed at San Diego Comic Con. Maybe we'll see production samples of them,
Yeah.
or something more. Who knows? But I'm excited, and I want my C-3PO.
I'm thinking and hoping that he's going to be on the probable list for New York Comic Con, which isn't that far away. So we will see.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's been our Fwooshcast. I want to point out we talked last time about the Fwoosh Marvel Legends Top 10 voting.
Yeah.
And an exciting announcement that I was just made aware of recently is that we are going to have the results of the voting here on the Fwooshcast. Is where we're going to reveal them first next week.
Yes.
So we're going to have our friend Prodigy on here, who has been running the vote and is going to bring the announcements in a sealed briefcase, which is handcuffed to his wrist. And refresh my memory: is the vote still on? Has the vote closed yet? Do we have another week?
I know the last time that we spoke on here, we said that the voting wasn't going to end until the 15th. That was actually a misprint in the actual article. The voting did technically end on the 1st. So the voting
okay,
is
so
over.
voting is closed.
He'll have all the tabulations ready to go, and we'll, like you said, we'll have the results on here probably 3 or 4 days ahead of when we'll actually put them on the front page. So you will hear it here first.
You will hear it here first. Again, the Marvel Legends Fwoosh Top 10 goes back to the very beginnings of the Fwoosh.
Yeah.
It's one of the Fwoosh cornerstones.
It's always fun to I love all the other top 10s that we do, but the Marvel ones are always fun to go through just to see what is so different and what is so exactly the same as they were way back then. And then I'm not a completist with Marvel Legends anymore by any stretch of the imagination, but I am very, very particular about what I want in that line. So I'll argue with the results all day long. So that'll be a fun conversation.
Yeah, it should be interesting, and it should be interesting because it's been a while, and there should be a lot of new faces in the top 10, because a lot of the perennial characters in that poll have either been made or announced in the last year. So it should be pretty interesting. You'll hear it here on the Fwooshcast first.
And we're actually going to do that next week, which usually we have a break in between. So it's going to come quicker than usual.
Think about it as a special edition of your Fwoosh Radio. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in. For Nick, this is Tony. This has been the Fwooshcast. It's your Fwoosh Radio, produced by yours truly, with help from Robakilla. Don't forget about that Marvel Top 10 announcement next week. You can find us on Facebook. Leave us a comment. Let us know what topics that you want to hear about on the Fwooshcast. You can shoot us an email at VB, that's VEE, BEE, at thefwoosh.com. Check out The Fwoosh on YouTube. You can find lots of great video reviews there of some of the latest figures, some stuff that's not even quite hit the shelves yet, as well as some great classic figures. Thanks for tuning in again, and hey, play nice.